Welcome, fans of the Justice League universe. My name is Sam.
My name is Rebecca.
And we are two members of the JLU Podcast team who enjoy analyzing the DC films from Warner Brothers Studios. Other contributors to this episode are Alessandro, Sydney, and Nick.
You can find us individually on Twitter, and you can also follow the show at JLU Podcast.
And we have finally arrived at scene 12 of Justice League. I almost couldn't contain myself in the intro because this is one of those scenes where we're going to dig into it, I guess, because we go scene by scene through the whole movie. So where we are.
Let's just get into it.
This is Lois and Martha's conversation at the Daily Planet building. So this scene has garnered a lot of reactions from people. But let's start at the beginning of the scene. So there is, we start on a TV screen, and there's a local news anchor of some sort, and he throws it over to like a field piece, and we have well, I don't know, what do we have here?
We have a woman who says that aliens stole my husband. That's a lower third graphic on the news broadcast, and she's telling the story about her husband, and it's kind of odd. I don't know if you feel this way, Sam, but this comes at the heels of Diana seeing the news report about the message from the Amazons, correct?
Yeah.
So we go from this sequence of Steppenwolf coming after the mother box on the mascara, and then Hippolyta sending the message to Diana because she knows that Diana will recognize it, and Diana sees it and says invasion. And then we come to this scene where it starts with a comedic scene. Right,
but it's also a TV screen, right? So it's kind of like, I guess they probably thought this was like a clever transition because Diana is looking at a TV screen to see, the flame burning. And then we go to this scene on a TV screen. So it's like, oh yeah, we will transition through the TV screen, but now we'll be in a different location and a different, news report. That's probably what they were thinking, like a sly way to get from scene to scene.
I can probably see why that case could be made, but the quality of the different broadcasts are very noticeable.
Yeah.
And the difference in tone, I think, is what's more criminal here, because you go from having a serious setup of an alien invasion, something that is so serious that the Amazons send a fire message to Wonder Woman.
And then we just saw Amazons who gave their lives to try to protect this mother box, but Steppenwolf actually got the mother box. So this is supposed to be like threat level rising, danger level rising.
Desperation.
And then Diana appropriately gets very concerned and realizes what it means, invasion. So all of that was building up like increase in tension. The threat is coming, we're moving to another level of threat. And so that, I think, I totally agree with you. It is really jarring to then just try to throw to some really lowbrow humor.
Yeah, for me, it really zaps all of that tension and all of that drama that had been built up before with the Steppenwolf attack in the Amazons, and it sucks out all of that air. Yeah,
and so if you were trying to actually get into the tension, then this place for humor seems counterproductive. Like Alessandro, he said like some people in the theater maybe laughed, but Alessandro said like I did not even smile at this because first of all he's like this is stupid. It's like sickening to see what's happening to the movie is like in Alessandro's view. But also I could see that for anybody who was actually getting caught up into the threat is not really going to find this funny because it's almost making fun of it. And if we think back to Howard, if we were supposed to actually be concerned for Howard, he's been kidnapped, he's in danger, what's going to happen to him? You shouldn't make jokes literally at Howard's expense and with Howard's wife. Like if that was supposed to actually be something that we're concerned about, then that's not where you put the jokes.
Yeah, I mean, someone's life is in danger and this should be a really serious thing. And they make it, even the Anchorman, I'm sorry, but the Anchorman is goofy. Yeah. So some of that, I think it's really, really unfortunate because I think it does undermine the threat level that's going on here.
Mm-hmm. And it's not like we're against humor in general. We're just saying that we don't like humor that undercuts something that the movie is actually trying to achieve, like in terms of emotional build and threats and stuff like that. The previous scene had some humor in it with Diana at the museum. He said, hey, Diana, how was your evening? Oh, nothing interesting. They were not making fun at the expense of Howard, who is actually in the danger. They were, Diana was not yet aware of the threat. Diana has no idea about Howard, right? So it's humor that is separate from the tension that's being built. So for me, that is humor that I'm fine with and I can enjoy. This one is humor that was after Diana realized the threat and the invasion, and it's humor that's at the expense of Howard, who is supposed to be in danger. We're supposed to be concerned about him. So like for me, it's like night and day in terms of what humor works and what kind of humor doesn't work.
That's a really great point about how Diana sort of makes that joke before she knows that there's an alien invasion threat. And I also think that the recipient of the joke, I guess, the person who is the butt of the joke, I think that's also important too. Diana sort of makes that joke about herself. It's almost a self-deprecating sense of humor where she knows she's Wonder Woman. She knows she's out there doing all these awesome things, but she kind of makes it like it's no big deal. So I think that that's definitely a much more appropriate way to incorporate humor into a scene.
Yeah. Now, if I were to take it out of the context and if I was just to look at it on its own as an attempt at humor, the anal probe thing I feel like is about a 15-year-old kind of joke. Sorry, I mean like it's a joke that 15-year-olds would make, but I also mean that it's like been around for 15 years. We've heard the anal probe joke. South Park did it probably 20 years ago. So for me, it's kind of a cliche old joke, and so that makes it less funny. Now, if I am judging the humor just on its own, I will say one thing that's a little bit funny to me, not to Alessandro, but to me, it's a little bit funny that after the TV is muted and Lois is walking away, you can see that the woman is still swearing like 7 or 8 cusses in a row. So if I took it out of the movie and I was just looking at it on its own, that's a little bit funny how much cussing she's doing, and it's getting bleeped out, and it's even when it's muted, she's still cussing. A little bit funny.
That local news station is going to rack up those FCC violations. They're going to be paying a lot of money for that. Hopefully they have a 7-second delay where they can get out of that. But yeah, it's something that if it came at you really quickly, maybe you would laugh at it. But when I actually look at the context of the scene, it's bothersome to me because, in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, they did a really effective job of showing why the media was important to the story. Mm-hmm. That it was kind of a character in the background who was not only just helping you further the exposition and understand what was going on in the scenes, mm-hmm. It was playing a part in the narrative that Lex Luthor was creating. It had a part to play.
Right.
Well, here it's just kind of this background noise that Lois has on in the office. So and I think it's even weird. Maybe this is just me reading into it, but I think it's just strange that it seems like Amy Adams had no idea what was on that TV when she, fake turned it off or muted it, I guess. She doesn't react at all to this alien story on the TV. You would think she'd have some sort of confused or bewildered face on her, but she doesn't react to it at all. So it makes me wonder, did Amy Adams not know what was going to be on that screen when they shot this moment? So I just think it's a very awkward transition from the Diana scene to this reuniting of Lois and Martha. It's just all very awkward.
Yeah. She might not have known what's on the screen, and the filmmakers might not have even known what was going to be on the screen. Like they might say, yeah, we'll put something up there later, like some sort of reminder of the plot or something like that, with the kidnappings happening or something like that. Yeah, that's very possible. But Lois mutes it. She walks away. And so we get into the conversation. So I wish we could say that the controversies and stuff were over, but we're going to still have some more of them. But it starts out okay. Like it's not horrible right away. We're coming to something that we'll have more to say about later. But the first part of it is just following up on what we saw about Martha Kent, which we saw early on in the film in the montage with the World Without Superman kind of thing, that she had moved out of her farmhouse in Smallville and that it was being foreclosed by the bank. So we get a little bit of a follow-up on that with Martha saying, oh, I got behind on my payments and the bank kind of took it. And so you kind of get the sense that Martha is not quite adjusted yet and is having some turmoil in her life because her son is gone,
Yeah, and she mentions that, the Kent farm was too big for her anyway, and she felt like she was walking around like a ghost. So some of that, I think, is appropriate for the character in this given point in the movie, that she is trying to rationalize why she's having to move out. She probably doesn't want to. I'm guessing she wouldn't really want to leave if she had the choice, but it sounds like she has no other choice, and she's just kind of rationalizing it in her brain and giving her reasons to make it okay that she's having to leave this place where she shared a life with Jonathan and Clark. So I do feel a little bit for Martha in this moment, because she has to leave this place where she has so many memories. And so I do appreciate that Lois wanted to help her. So they do have a little bit of a back and forth about the Kent farm.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably what the idea behind the scene was when it was inserted into the movie, was let's just check in on where Martha is and where Lois are in moving on from Clark's death. So we hear, okay, Martha's living by the diner. She lost, foreclosed on, but it was kind of by choice that she, didn't want to live in the farmhouse anymore. And then we're going to check in with Lois, and she's not really 100%. She's not fully into her work anymore. She's kind of taking some time to reorient herself and grieve and that sort of thing. So I'm guessing that was the idea behind the scene. And there's a little bit of dynamics between Martha and Lois, but so Clark died. That's a huge deal. But I also don't like it that these women, the only thing they have to do in the movie is just to react to the fact that Clark has died. Neither of them actually has a subplot that they're following. They're just basically, let's check in with them and see how they're grieving about Clark, instead of actually, having some sort of story and growth or something like that for their own character.
Which is a huge departure from the previous two installments in this franchise.
Yeah.
But both Lois Lane and Martha Kent had substantial roles in both Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. Lois Lane put Lex Luthor behind bars, and Martha Kent, love it or hate it, she was the climax of Batman v Superman, basically, to wake up Batman and save Superman's life. So I think it's really unfortunate. I think that's one of the many reasons I have some dislike for this scene, is that I find it to be a big disrespect to these two characters who have previously been shown to have a lot of story, mm-hmm. to have been treated with a lot of reverence and respect, and mm-hmm. here they are, one of them making the other one a butt of the joke, and Martha sort of mm-hmm. cracks a joke about Lois, and Martha's she kind of comes across as old and out of touch, and I think that's really strange, because she's in Man of Steel, she told General Zod to go to hell. This is not somebody who's just kind of a withering old widow. She's someone to be reckoned with if she wants mm-hmm. to be. So mm-hmm. I think it's just a really unfortunate scene for both of these characters.
And she was somebody who was giving, consultation and advice to the most powerful person on the planet.
Absolutely.
She was the person that he would go to when he needed that advice and stuff. And I think she loved her son. But I think she also did a good job of not just telling Clark what he wanted to hear, but telling Clark kind of what he needed to hear from his mom at the time. But yeah, so for me, this is another departure. Like you said, it's a departure in terms of the large scale character arc and purpose of the women. It's also a departure on the characterization. In this scene, it seems like whoever wrote this scene, I think I probably know who it is, but whoever wrote it seemed to just pluck a new character trait out and give it to Martha Kent for this scene, which is like she blurts out things the wrong way or something and then like reels it back in or tries to correct it. She does that 2 or 3 times in this scene. One of them is a very famous time that we'll get to, but she does it other times too. I never had that pegged as part of the Martha Kent character. Like, to me, she was never somebody who like, oh, she blabbed something out and then, oh, she didn't mean to say it that way. Like, I never got that about her before.
Yeah, and that's something that's a lot different, especially since the last time we saw them together before this is at the end of Batman v Superman, where they go to Clark's funeral. And there's that really nice scene where Martha goes into Clark's bedroom where Lois is laying down on the bed, and she gives her the ring and all of that. And it's a really sweet moment. They have a nice connection there. And they're at Clark's funeral, you know, kind of arm in arm, helping each other get through the grief and leaning in on each other for comfort. And they seemed very, you know, in sync and not needing a lot of words to communicate how each other was feeling. And so it is a very different dynamic here in the scene.
We also have this guy that comes in from the Daily Planet. I guess he's supposed to be like an underling kind of reporter, like somebody that's not to the level of Lois Lane. And so it's kind of, it's highlighting the fact that random guy is getting the kidnapping story instead of Lois Lane, you know, and then Martha even comments like, you should have that story. So it's kind of showing like, look at that guy. Like, he is getting this story that actually turns out to be like a very important story. Of course, we're not going to ever see that guy again in the movie, but he comes in. He comes in basically to remind us that there's this kidnapping, which we already been reminded about it from the TV report.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point. That we're getting the information twice here, which seems a little redundant and a little overkill. I think it's also trying to show that Lois kind of doesn't care. She's not at this point. She's not really feeling her job. She doesn't want to have anything to do with big stories. She's doing stories, you know, puff pieces about kitten grooming and all these kinds of smaller stories. And that even kind of made Martha laugh. And it's sad to, you know, see someone come in and take Lois's story from her. I can understand that, you know, in the character of Lois at this point in her journey, she would feel some sadness walking into the Daily Planet, where she probably went with Clark every day and they sat near each other at work and they saw each other all the time. And so for her to go there by herself now, even though she had, you know, before Clark showed up, she went there all the time, probably by herself. But after having Clark in her life and then not having Clark in her life, that probably did make a big difference. But Lois just seems really kind of beat up and not wanting to do anything. And it's very sad to see her like that. I know they try to give her like a little clever moment where she sort of tricks that random guy about the source, but I don't know. I think I don't know that it accomplishes anything other than that. The whole interaction is very surface level. It doesn't do multiple things.
Right. And like, you know, both of us are huge fans of BVS, and in BVS we went through the whole movie, and every time that we would look at a moment like this, we would actually make some additional connections and see some insights and be like, oh, wow, that actually also, you know, connects to this theme that's been going throughout. We've looked at this TV report and we've looked at this random guy that comes in, and I think there isn't really a deeper part to it. It doesn't connect into some underlying themes of the movie that I can see. I think it's basically, we'll have this guy come in, he'll have a little Daily Planet banter, and he will remind the audience that there's these kidnappings. To me, that seems like that was how it was written, and that's what it does. And it's, you know, like you said, it's very surface level from what I can tell. In BVS and in Man of Steel, I think those ones, they wouldn't just throw surface stuff like that in there. Everything was kind of like part of the bigger tapestry.
Yeah, in good screenwriting, I've always been told that your scene should accomplish more than one thing. It should be doing multiple things in the scene. And so this, I don't particularly
this one
find
does
this,
the same thing multiple times.
yeah, I don't find this to be written very well. It may have been written very quickly. I don't know. Maybe it was written to accomplish one thing and one thing only. But I think if you wanted it to analyze it for, you know, whether or not it was good writing, I think it needs to, in order for it to be good writing, I should say, it needs to accomplish more than one thing. And I also thought it was weird just on a visual that this random guy who shows up in the break room just interrupts their conversation. He's carrying a notepad, which I thought was hilariously out of date. I guess maybe they thought, oh, journalists, back in the 1940s, they used notepads. And so the guy comes in with his notepad like he's going to, jot something down in His Girl Friday. And I just thought it sort of sets us back a few years, maybe a few decades even, with the technology of where journalism is shown to be in this universe. In Man of Steel, Lois is using tablets. She's using, iPads and things. I think even Jenny had one in Batman v Superman. So here we're even going backwards in terms of the way journalism is represented here in this scene. I just, even on a surface visual level, I thought that was really strange.
Yeah, because what was he expecting, to write down the source? But like, did he think that Lois would say what her source was and then like dictate the email address? Like, yeah, my source is Sally Williams and her email address is Williams S72 at blah blah. Like, Lois is just gonna have the email address. No, like what would really happen is you would say like, hey, I'm gonna talk to you about this. Hey, can you shoot it to me? And then she would email it over, or she would text it over, or something.
Yeah.
I've never heard anybody dictate aloud an email address like that. Just walking into a room.
That's probably a nitpick, but I just thought it was interesting that we've previously seen Lois operate a certain way with the technology that was available to her at the Daily Planet. And then we get this representation of this guy who looks like he stepped out of the 1940s. So
no, I don't think it's a nitpick. I think that's the biggest criticism that I've usually seen of this scene is the notepad. No, let's get to the actual biggest complaint about the scene. So Martha and Lois are talking, and Martha says, "I'm kind of surprised that you're not working, back to work and stuff, because Clark always said you were the thirstiest woman he knows," or whatever it was. Then there's a beat of kind of, Lois' eyes kind of going big off to the side at the phrase "thirstiest," and then Martha corrects herself. Oh, I mean hungriest. Hilarious.
Well, the sad thing is that when I saw this for the first time in the fan viewing, there was a fan viewing a few days before the movie released in theaters, and
yeah, I went to that too.
Everyone in my theater laughed at it.
Wow.
Everyone. And I think that they probably had a test screening and it played just like that on the test screening, and they thought that was great. But if I can put some context around this moment, Sam, I think it would help me articulate and communicate why I find this so disrespectful. Just because Lois Lane in this universe, in Batman v Superman, she is set up to be the most important character in this entire thing. She's called the Key. They don't really play that up much in this movie, but in Batman v Superman, we previously knew her as the Key. She was supposed to be the most important person. Even in Batman v Superman, prior to this, Superman and Clark refers to her as his world. And here she is, being the butt of a joke, being referred to as, thirsty, and it just sort of deflates all of that importance that was placed on Lois previously, and why she was so important to Clark, why she was so important to the idea of Superman, and here she is being the butt of a joke. And I think that's really unfortunate for the character of Lois Lane, and I think that does a real disrespect to her part in this adaptation of the DC universe.
Yeah. And one of the things that I liked about Man of Steel and BVS was that Clark and Lois's relationship was not based on flirty allusions to underwear or sexual situations or anything like that. I felt like they had a very mature, and it was presented respectfully, adult relationship. The original Superman movie, people said it had a lot of charm, but I never really resonated with the flirtation and stuff that the way that they did the flirtation in the classic Superman movie. So I liked that about Man of Steel, BVS. But now here we get this little side allusion to their sexual relationship. And it also is not an active relationship. He's dead. So it's an allusion to their past sexual relationship before he died. To me, you usually would not bring up sex for somebody that's deceased. I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah, no, that's definitely weird. There is one good thing I like about this scene is that Lois and Martha recognize their relationship to each other. Martha refers to herself as Lois's mother-in-law, and Lois seems like she likes the idea of that. So I think that that's really nice.
And Lois has the ring on, which I like as well.
Which unfortunately never gets a payoff whatsoever. But in this, I'm going to say in this cut of the movie, she doesn't get any payoff with the ring. But it's just weird when you put thirsty in the context of a sexual relationship, and to have the mother-in-law say that to her daughter-in-law, it's not right.
Mm-hmm. You're right, because this was after the mother-in-law was established. So yeah. So multiple levels. Doesn't quite work. Alessandro's word for this was terrible. But yeah, let's go on into the scene where Martha tries to reclaim a little bit of the conversation and stuff. And then she says, you're the hungriest, and then she kind of tries to say about back to Lois's work. She says, Clark always said you could smell a story. And then promised that you'd have another Pulitzer. For me, smell is a word that always sticks out to me whenever I hear it, because it's not a common word that people use, smell. But she says you could smell a story. And later on, there's a scene with Clark and Lois where the word smell comes up again, and it's Clark saying you smell good. So for some reason, there's smell going on with Lois. Again, in BVS, if a word was repeated, you could trace it and you'd have this elegant motif, and the motif usually connected with a bigger theme. Here, I've noticed the word smell twice in relation to Lois. Doesn't really do anything for me, conceptually.
Yeah, we've gotten anal probes and Lois smelling things. It's just very, very strange. But yeah, you're right. I think that if you had something like that where it is repeated many times, it should have a meaning. It should go back to something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess you could connect it back to her telling Clark that he smelled good. It's a weird choice. I don't know how else to say it. Just a lot about this scene is just a weird choice. And
there's at least one more weird choice that you heard in preparation for the episode.
Yeah, so I hadn't really watched this scene a lot since it disgusted me the first couple of times I watched it. And so I kind of put it aside, didn't pay any attention to it. And then I listened to it with earbuds in, and I noticed that there's a moment Martha says, she starts this line of dialogue. She says, and Clark always promised me. And during that part of the dialogue, there's a musical cue that sounds like Hans Zimmer's Kryptonian music. Mm-hmm. And I just, it's very short. It's maybe 2 notes. But I just think it's a weird, it's just, I just don't understand the choice behind that, because when Zimmer would use that music, it would be if there was something related to Krypton or the Kryptonian scout ship, or, the Fortress of Solitude or something like that. They're not talking about Superman. They're talking more so about Clark. So if you were talking about Clark in the scene, musically, it would be more appropriate to have the piano notes that bring in his humble theme. So I just question it. I think it's very, very bizarre. It's almost like nobody who was associated with Man of Steel and Batman v Superman were around when they were doing this, and no one questioned them on it to say, hey, maybe that is not maybe the right time to use that cue. Mm-hmm. So I just thought it was strange when I listened to it, because I hadn't heard that before, and then I was wondering why it was even there in the first place.
Yeah, thankfully it's not an extended sampling or anything like that. It's easy to not even notice it, but then if you do notice it, you're kind of like, that's a weird choice. But then luckily it goes away and it kind of just becomes like generic string music for the end of the scene. But yeah, there's kind of 2 notes that come in across the top, sort of like a soaring steel guitar or something like that. Yeah, that would definitely not be there's a lot of music that I want to bring back around from Man of Steel and BVS, but this would not be the place, and that would not be the one I would choose right now.
Yeah, I think those kinds of moments are, you have to use the right music in the right setting, in the right time, and the cueing the right moment. And I think that was the wrong choice, and I I just don't understand it. I don't understand it, because I think that there's another moment in this movie where they do go into the one of the Kryptonian ships where Zod was transformed into Doomsday, and there is a little bit of that Hans Zimmer Kryptonian music. That is an appropriate use of it, even though they should have used Hans Zimmer's Superman stuff way more in this movie than they did. That at least was an appropriate use of it. Here in this scene, I don't think it makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm just thankful that it's kind of only 2 notes and that it doesn't really continue with the theme. It kind of abandons it. So you can kind of try to go back to the point where you didn't even notice it.
Maybe I will try to, but now that I've heard it, I don't know that I can unhear it.
So definitely have some qualms with the scene.
That's fitting in nicely.
But we are checking in with Lois. So if we wanted to try to put an arc on Lois, we could say she's mourning the loss of Superman and Clark. She's not working. She's not her normal self. She gets Clark, Superman back, and then that is a reinsertion of, her professional vigor and her passion and things like that. So then it could be that her arc concludes by the end of the movie, where we have a narration where she kind of is saying like, hey, hope was there all along, and, look up to the sky, that sort of thing. So maybe there's a connection here in terms of her story beats of going from not writing, not working to, at the end, I am going to write this story about Superman and heroes.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to assess. I think we do get to see, she's sort of down on her job and what she wants to do, because she doesn't feel right at the Daily Planet without Clark. And by the end of it, when Superman has come back, she feels like her place at the Daily Planet, she can go back to that. Although I don't know what that says about her self-confidence, that she thinks that she can't do that without a man. Like, she was doing that without Clark for a long time. Mm-hmm. But I'll understand that, it's part of an emotional separation that's causing her to have those doubts. So I'll try to go with that. But I think when you kind of drill it down, I don't know if that has a good message to it or not, because I think Lois should be able to pick herself up no matter what, but that may be just a personal gripe there. She has a line that says, she says, stories make sense. It was more than just a puzzle. It was about the truth. It was about seeing the engine of the world when it still ran. Mm-hmm. The one thing I do like about this line of dialogue is that she emphasizes the truth. Lois Lane is a character, especially in this universe in particular, who is always about the truth. She's always talking about the truth. She talks about it in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. It's very forefront to her character. It's the essence of her character. So I like that she uses it here, but I don't know that I fully understand this line. It sort of comes out of nowhere. It's very tonally different than what else is happening in the scene. For most of the scene, it's jokey and anal probes and being thirsty. And then all of a sudden at the end of the scene, she's trying to have a serious reflective moment. And and I would love your thoughts on this, Sam. I don't fully understand what she's trying to say here. I guess she's reflecting on the fact that without Clark in her life, she feels like the world has stopped spinning, and she, her life has stopped spinning because he's not in it. I don't know. I'm having a difficult time interpreting it.
Yeah, it's pretty clunky too, like mixing metaphors, I guess you would call it, because stories make sense. It was more than just a puzzle. So now there's this metaphor of like trying to figure things out as like putting together a puzzle. It was about truth. It was about seeing the engine of the world. So now we've already abandoned the puzzle metaphor and we're switching to an engine metaphor. Yeah. But we don't really get anything out of either metaphor. We don't really get more nuance out of the puzzle metaphor, and we don't get more nuance out of the engine metaphor. It's just like I'm going to throw 2 metaphors in at the same time and just mix them up. And also, if you're a fan of this universe, and if you say engine of the world, that's a world engine. That's a very important phrase. And I don't see, like, that doesn't make sense here.
And also in terms of the world, that is what Lois, she symbolizes that. She's Clark/Superman's world. So for me, I think this would work a little better if there was a play on world to somehow talk about her feelings. So yeah, I would agree. I think that probably really narrows it down as to why I'm so confused about this line of dialogue, is because it is mixing metaphors. It doesn't explain itself very well.
All right, I think we can go ahead and put this scene to bed and move on. But yeah, thanks so much, Rebecca, for joining me on this one. Yeah, this was one of those scenes where when I knew we were analyzing Justice League, I'm like, okay, what's going to happen when we get to that scene?
Yeah, this scene is just really unfortunate because I think it's just visually it's not very interesting. It looks like they were rushing through it. Maybe they did it in one take. Just there's not a lot going on. It's a 2-shot and a couple of close-ups.
Yeah, so the camera work was very uninspired. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, if it was me and I wanted to emphasize Lois's ring, maybe I'd do a shot of her holding her coffee and doing a close-up of the ring, something. Mm-hmm. So visually, it's very unappealing. A lot of the dialogue is very awkward and strange, and some of it doesn't make any sense. The timing of it coming off the heels of what Diana had seen on the news, it was very weirdly timed. The music's not even appropriate here. So I just the whole scene is honestly kind of a mess. There's a few things that I like about it in terms of the Martha Lois dynamic, where there's a mention of the mother-in-law, but of course we don't even get a payoff to that because there's not even a mention of her being engaged to Clark. So some of it is, there might be one or two things in there that you can kind of pull out, or at least for me that I can kind of pull out that I like, but it's a really unfortunate scene all around.
Yeah, the few small good things are overshadowed by the inappropriate and ill-chosen things. And it's also not really a very necessary scene. So all that together. We will move on into other scenes next. But thanks, everybody, for listening. If you have thoughts on the scene, we'd love to hear them from you. You can find us on Twitter at JLU Podcast. You can email us at jlupodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to be entered into giveaways or get bonus content, you can find our stuff at patreon.com/JLU Podcast.